Hello students, welcome to my live teaching learning session of MMPC 016. Today we will discuss about Unit 2, Block 1, Globalization and Evolving Paradigm. First of all, we must have to know about what is the meaning of globalization and what role globalization play in international business dynamics. You know that globalization India has adopted this LPG policy, liberalization, privatization, and globalization in 1991. At present, most of the countries have adopted this globalization, and globalization is a way that people around the world have become more connected politically, economically, and socially. If whole world is connected with each and everyone, either it may be socially, politically, and economically. That is called globalization. So, in today's session, we will discuss about globalization and evolving paradigm. The main objective of this reading is that this topic will explain
ठीक।
स्टार्टिंग से कराने का।
बस।
पीछे वाला नहीं सर, वही कराना। Now, introduction of this topic is globalization and evolving paradigm. You know that globalization is an integral relationship with rest of the world. At present, most of the economies are globalized economies. Globalization has long been considered similar to internationalization. However, globalization is a broader concept which extends beyond integration of market and influence all aspects of international economy. Its evolution can be traced to the beginning of 19th century, and it has developed different phases to the present time. It has led to the integration of the world economy, which has added to the element of interdependence among nation states and society on various aspects of life. The process of globalization deals with the integration of global economies, global strategies, global industry, and global markets. It means globalization is a process in which we can increase the integral relationship with rest of the world. India has adopted this globalization system in new economic policy of 1991, and at present the flow of goods and services, labor flow, cultural flow, and information and technologies flow can be very easily, it can be transferred from one place to another place in a very simple way with the help of this globalization process. And globalization is a very broader concept which extends beyond integration of market, and it influences all aspects of international economy. And now this globalization process evoluted, or evolution of globalization beginning of 19th century, and it has developed in different phases to the present times. At present, the process of globalization deals with the integration of global economies, global markets, global strategies, and global industry. Now, definition of globalization, each economics give differ and different definition of globalization. Economics differ globally on definition of globalization, and there is no universally agreed definition of globalization. The term globalization is typically used to refer to international integration among economies and area such as production, investment, and trade and labor markets. Hence, globalization refers to the movement of labor, investment, production, information, transportation, economic, financial, trade, and communication integration with rest of the world. In other words, we can say that globalization means the opening of local and nationalistic perspective to a broader outlook of an interconnected, reciprocal, and interdependent world order which facilitate the free flow of goods and services, capital, and ideas. It means at present the flow of goods and services, flow of labor, flow of ideas, flow of culture, flow of investment can be possible with the help of globalization. So globalization is a very broader concept. In international trade, we include only goods and services trade. But in globalization, we include all aspects of economy. Either it may be socially, politically, economically, or it's related to the culture also. Next is globalization does not include unhindered movement of labor, or if there is any obstacle of transferring labor from one country to another country, there is not free flow of labor in across the world. That is not included in globalization. So globalization does not include unhindered movement of labor. However, such free flow may exist among agreed trade blocs and economic union. If benchmarked with degree of economic, social, political, and environmental integration, globalization is not a new phenomenon. It has existed for centuries and is a continuous process. It is the increased degree of such integration that makes globalization a buzzword in 21st century. So globalization is not a new phenomena, and it increased the degree of integration with the rest of the world in all aspects of the economy. Origin of globalization. What are the reasons behind the origin of globalization and how this concept of globalization originated? Now, globalization, you know that it's a continuous process. It's not a new phenomenon. It's a broader concept. And in this concept, we increase the integral relationship with rest of the world, and there is a very free flow of all things like goods, services, labor, transportation, communication, information, investment. All things can be traded with rest of the world with free flow of all things without any restrictions. This globalization is the process which began in the 20th century with the spread of capitalist system around the world. Capitalism is a system in which all the means of production or factors of productions are owned by private entrepreneurs. In some countries, there is a capitalist system exist. Capitalist economies are those economies which mainly produce goods and services only for profit motive, not for social welfare. And in capitalist economy, there is a freedom of consumption, freedom to choose any type of business organization, and there is a freedom to fix the price of with the help of demand and supply curve forces. And USA economy is capitalist economy in which all the means of production are owned by private entrepreneurs and government does not interfere in any economic activity. However, globalization has evolved over centuries as a socio-economic phenomenon. As a result, globalization is not a new phenomenon as the world system has maintained some of its main features over several centuries. In the beginning of 14th century, modern political system of governance originated in parts of Western Europe, which was experiencing a prolonged crisis of feudalism. You know that there are five types of economic system which were existed at earlier time period. One was primitive community. Second was feudalism. Third was capitalism. Fourth, socialism. And fifth is mixed economy. First of all, primitive community were existed everywhere. After that, feudalism system came into existence. After that, capitalism. Some countries adopted this capitalist economic system in which means of productions are owned by private entrepreneurs. Some countries adopted a socialism system like China and Russia, in which all the factors of productions are owned by government or state, and there is no private ownership on any factor of production, and the motive of production is and the motive of government is social welfare. Producer produce goods and services for social welfare, not for earning only profit motive. After that, some economies adopted this mixed economic system like India. India has adopted mixed economic system in which both private and public, both the sectors are coexist in it. And this paved the way of the rise in market institutions and technological innovations. You know that in 14th century, modern political system of governance originated in parts of Western Europe, which was experiencing a prolonged feudalism or crisis of feudalism. This paved the way to the rise in market institution and technological innovations. Europeans reached other parts of globe through the long distance trade routes and made technological advances in production techniques and methods. Next is Europeans started colonizing the parts of world. You know that European countries colonized most of the countries of the world. So Europeans started colonization the parts of world, taking raw material and processing it into finished goods. Because in European countries, or especially in Britain, industrial revolution started very at a very first time, and they use raw material for industries to make finished goods. India was also colonized by European country or Britain, and again selling those goods in the market around the world, including their colonial market. You know that in India, Britain or England has colonized Indian economy uh, near about 200 years and exploited Indian economy very badly, and all the wealth was drained by European countries, and they take raw material from the India and use it for making finished goods, and after that again export it to the Indian economy, and they import raw material which was cheaper at price level and exported finished goods which was at higher prices. So they color they take advantages of both types of exports and imports. This led to accumulation of wealth, which supported a strong and superior military power. The technological innovations resulted in improved means of transportation, thus further facilitating the strong economic linkages among nations around the globe. In a nutshell, a capitalist economic power of the European countries succeeded in geographic and occupational division of labor. So, globalization is not a new phenomena. Globalization was existed in all over the world near about in 14th century, and European started colonized the parts of the world. The first stage of globalization, which started in 1830, became more stabilized by 1880. This period was marked by the growth of global business due to development of railroads, ocean transports, and large-scale manufacturing and trading companies. Telegraph and telephone were invented, which further gave rise to enhanced information flow between nations and facilitated the management of supply chains among the companies. So this process is a very old process, not a new process. And the first stage of globalization started in 1830 and become stabilized in which year? 1880. Due to the development of transports facilities like railroads, ocean transport, large-scale communication, and manufacturing companies, telegraph and telephones inventions also gave enhancement to the information flow between the nations and facilitated the management of supply chains among the companies. The second stage of globalization, you know that first stage of globalization was started in 1830 and stabilized in 1880. Now the second stage of globalization, which started around 1900, was marked by the increase in electricity and steel production. The stage of globalization reached its climax during the Great Depression period of 1929. This Great Depression period is 1929 to 1933. At this time period, whole world was suffering from depression period due to excess in aggregate supply and deficient in aggregate demand. And especially USA and UK were suffering from this depression period, and near about 17 to 20% people were unemployed in USA and UK countries. At that time, USA and UK was the most powerful country in the world, and depression period reduces the level of employment in these countries. That's why this time period is known as Great Depression period. And the main reason of this Great Depression was that aggregate supply was greater than aggregate demand. And J.M. Keynes gave the solution of this depression period, and Keynes suggested that if we assume that aggregate supply remains constant and if we increase the aggregate demand, if aggregate demand is not increasing in our country, then we have to sell goods and services in other countries or developing countries. We should increase the demand. Either it can be increased in our country or in rest of the world. So if demand increases, then producer will encourage and unsold stock will sold out, and producer will again produces more goods and services. Their profit motive will increase and employment level will also increase, and this can solve the problem of depression. So in 1929 to 33 time period was Great Depression period, and J.M. Keynes gave the suggestion of solving this problem, and Western Europe was also the most industrially developed regions of the world in 1900. Multinational firms were established as a result of European colonization of Asia, Middle East, and Africa. MNCs, multinational corporations. Multinational corporations bring their capital in a huge quantity. They bring their technology. They bring their professionals in developing countries, and they started their business activities in developing countries where large population existed. So they want to gain maximum profit. That's why multinational corporations bring their capital their professionals, their technology in most of the developing countries, and multinational firms were established as a result of European colonization of Asia, Middle East, and Africa continent. The companies like Siemens, Nestle, Shell, and British Petroleum had established their subsidiaries in various parts of the world. Before 1914, 1914 was the time period of First World War period. Before 1914, many companies were established at a global level, and all these companies are were belong to British or European companies. The third stage of globalization started around 1945 after World War II, when Europe and Japan were devastated by the war and USA and erstwhile USSR emerged as a dominant power. You know that the First World War time period was 1914 to 1919, and the Second World War time period is 1939 to 45. So the first stage of globalization started in 1830. The second stage of globalization started in 1900, and the third stage of globalization started after 1945, after World War II, and Europe and Japan were devastated by the war, and USA and USSR, Russia, were the most dominant power in the world. During the war, the trade barriers were high. So the developed countries wished to lessen the barriers to international trade. They want to decrease the barriers or obstacles, and they interested to do free flow of trade of goods and services. This led to Bretton Woods Conference of 1947, in which 23 countries participated, and resulted in the setting up of General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which is known as GATT, which sought to liberalize trade and investment by reducing trade barriers. This gave rise to industrialization, modernization, and improving the standard of living. GATT was subsequently replaced by another multilateral trade agency, that is WTO, in 1995. India was the founder member of GATT. In 1947, when GATT was established, then 23 countries were participated in this agreement, and India was the founder member of GATT. But GATT was a narrow concept, and WTO is a very broader concept, because in 1995, when GATT was converted into WTO, WTO is based on multilateral trade agreements. But GATT was based on unilateral trade agreements or bilateral trade agreements. Unilateral means one-sided, bilateral means two-sided, and multilateral means different aspects, and we can do trade with different nations at a time. At present, near about 150 or more than 150 countries are the member countries of WTO. But in 1947, when GATT was established, at that time 23 countries were the member countries of GATT. So WTO at present decided all the terms and conditions for doing international trade, and WTO decided that what type of trade should exist in the all over the world, like free flow of goods and services, or free trade, or protective trade, and subsidies should be reduced or increased. All things, all terms and conditions, all rules and regulations are at present decided by WTO for doing international trade very easily, which is established to WTO is established to regulate international trade and investment and to introduce equality and transparency in global exchange. Why this WTO was organized? Why this WTO was established? The main reason of WTO establishment is to promote international trade and to promote investment and to introduce equality and transparency by doing goods and services exchange with rest of the world. So this third stage of globalization started in 1945 after World War II, when USA and Russia or USSR emerged as a dominant power. Now, to further facilitate international cooperation, two international organizations were set up. One was IMF. IMF is International Monetary Fund, and second is World Bank. And IMF and World Bank were set up in 1944 by USA. This was followed by the rise of multinational corporations, MNCs. Multinational corporations are a very huge and very giant size corporations which spread their subsidiaries branches in all over the world or in most of the developing countries where large number of population lived. And most of the MNCs like Coca-Cola, Philips, IBM, which established their global presence by the virtue of technological and competitive advantages and started outsourcing their business in developing countries to reap the benefits of cheap labor and easy access to global markets. Why MNCs are interested to do business and expand their subsidiary branches in developing countries? The reason is that in developing countries, huge population lived. And due to huge population or abundant manpower, labor is available at a very cheaper rate. And they know that developing countries still dependent for employment opportunities and for investment on abroad. That's why multinational corporations or developed countries, big corporations, establish their business or subsidiary branches in all over the world with the help of bringing their capital, bringing their technology, and started their multinational companies in developing countries to reap the benefit of cheap labor and easy access to global markets. So, to facilitate this international cooperation, two main international organizations were set up in 1944, and that was one is International Monetary Fund, which provide financial facilities to the rest of the world for improving their standard of living, for encouraging more investment in their country, and World Bank also provide loans and advance facilities to the developing or underdeveloped countries. And these two financial organizations or international organizations were set up at that time when Second World War, Japan and other European countries were affected by Second World War. By 1960s, the increase in the process of liberalization by removing trade barriers and currency control led to increasing international trade and investment and integrated international financial markets. This was followed by increasing competition among the US, European countries, and Japanese MNCs, multinational corporations. So by 1960s, liberalization process was started, and liberalization is a process in which each and every economy want to open up the economy for rest of the world, and we can liberalize our economy by removing the barriers or hurdles of trade and currency control led to increase in international trade and investment and integrated international financial markets. Why this liberalization was started? This was started by increasing competition among the US, European, and Japanese MNCs. In 1980s marked the beginning of the fourth and the present stage of globalization, which experienced increasing global trade and investment. So, the origin of globalization is classified into four stages. In first stage, globalization first stage is known as the time period of 1830. In second stage, the globalization time period is known as 1900 or First World War time period. And in third stage, the time period of globalization process is known as after World War II, 1945. And the fourth stage and the present stage of globalization marked at 1980s time period, which experienced increasing global trade and investment. Now, next is the evolving paradigm of globalization. Now, let us, till now we have discussed about meaning of globalization and the origin of globalization, how this concept originated and what are the various stages of globalization. Now, next topic is the evolving paradigm of globalization. Now, let us discuss the evolving paradigm of globalization in the context of latest geo-economic and geostrategic development in the world economy. COVID-19 pandemic and resultant disruption of economic activity and trade supply chains has once again brought to limelight the contagion call of balancing the global supply chain operations. The sudden rise of China and resultant trade imbalances have been the subject matter of worry to many countries in the world. The trade war between the US and China is testimony of it, wherein the US has accused China of violating the fundamental principles of WTO, which was non-discrimination and transparency, by leveraging ambiguous and vague trade rules in favor of Chinese manufacturing and technology giants. It means at the time period of COVID-19, it was came into limelight that there is a war in between of US trade war. This war is not a particular war for taking any land area of US and other thing. No, it's a trade war between the US and China, which wherein the US has accused that China is violating the rules of WTO, and the rule is that non-discrimination and rule is transparency in trade, but China is violating these two principles of WTO for taking advantages, and these trade rules in favor of Chinese manufacturing and technological giants. That's why China expanding their business activities across the world and taking more advantages by manufacturing more products and selling them in rest of the world. Next is a large number of developing countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are propagating the inward-looking policies, as they realized that benefits of globalization are unevenly distributed in hands of either selected developed countries or in hands of China and few Southeast Asian economies. Some economists argue that globalization and its discontents. Globalization is not always favored to all countries equally. Globalization give benefit to most of the developed countries and give less benefit to developing countries. So, at present, a large number of developing countries are propagating the inward looking policies or inward trade policies and strategies because they realized that globalization are unevenly distributed in hands of either some selected developed countries or in hands of China and few Southeast Asian economies. With import turning unsustainable in many countries of the world, the domestic policies are realigned in favor of domestic manufacturing and trade. This development has given rise to the debate that globalization has been abandoned. Globalization is beneficial for all over the world, or it spread some negative effects on developing and underdeveloped nations. India policy choices. India policy choices in this globalization, re-globalization, and gated globalization. As a nation, India has to make choice about what can work for India. While gated globalization is restrictive and trade distorting, as it is government which will decide whom to trade with and what kind of investment regime they would like to have with. Gated globalization for any country is not possible as it disallows the market access to the most efficient and effective trade supply chain, providing essential and cost effective inputs for trade of both capital, goods, and networked products. So, these are the three concepts. Globalization, we know that globalization is an integral relationship with rest of the world. Re-globalization, again further if we started this process that is called re-globalization, and gated globalization puts some restriction and trade distortion by the government which will decide whom to trade and whom to trade with and what kind of investment regime they would like to have with. So gated globalization is not possible as it disallows to market the market access to the most efficient and effective trade supply chain, providing essential and cost effective inputs for trade both of capital goods and networked products. Trade war with the USA, increasing geostrategic hegemony with neighbors, rising wages, and failing and crumbling investment in roads and belt initiative had already incentivized by some nations as well as multinational corporations to reallocate their supply chains away from China to other parts of Asia. For example, the textile sector has already moved to Vietnam, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. COVID-19 pandemic is pushing more firms to relocate. For example, leather producing firms want to relocate to Agra, Kanpur, and Ranipet, which exist in Tamil Nadu, as they find India to be more attractive in terms of supply of raw material and labor cost. So the trade war with USA increasing geostrategic hegemony with neighbors. And at present, some of the industries are moving in that place where they feel that they can produce more and they find more and cheaper labor and raw material. Next is effects of globalization. Now we will study and discuss about this thing, that what are the main effects of globalization. Now you have a fair idea of how present day globalization evolved. We shall now briefly discuss the effects of globalization. We have examined from several definitions of globalization given by various thinkers. You might have noted a common feature of the definition by these thinkers who regard globalization as a process of increasing the economic, political, cultural, and technological interdependence among nations and countries. Globalization is a process by which there is an increasing interconnection and dependence between nations, people, and businesses through greater cross country mobility, communication, and cross cultural exchange. Thus, globalization process has given impetus to greater global production and distribution of products and services of a homogeneous kind of a worldwide basis. Globalization has some positive impacts all over the world. Now we can uh, demarcate, demarcate the separate areas of the effects of the process of globalization. And these areas of globalization are as follows. Number one is integration of economies. First of all, globalization increase the integration with rest of the world. So globalization essentially leads to greater interdependence among countries. For example, China is the largest producer of raw material for pharmaceuticals, known as active pharma ingredients and excipients. India imports huge quantities of these APIs and excipients from China to manufacture a variety of generic drugs to world market. India is referred as the pharmacy of the world for its innate capacities to supply generic drugs to the world market at a fraction of cost of what some of these drugs are sold in developed countries. In this process, the entire mankind benefit from the raw material expertise of China and manufacturing excellence of India for supply chain of low-cost generic drugs to world market. Second is integration of strategy. Globalization also give positive impact for making integral strategy for business enterprises. A global strategy would require establishing the brand name and product in prominent markets globally in order to reap the benefits of competitive advantage through scale, scope, system, and synergy economies. This further facilitates integration of global vision, business strategy, and business activities throughout the world. So this is the second benefit of globalization, integration of strategy. Integration of industries, globalization also facilitates to increase in the integration of industrial activities or production activities and distribution of value-added goods to the world market on the basis of competitive advantage. Global industries become interdependent and enjoying location advantages by virtue of their presence in host countries or parent or third world countries and leveraging the cost effective factor of production in the entire supply chain operation of a firm. Now, next fourth point is integration of markets. Globalization also increasing or integrating the markets all over the world. Globalization leads to lowering of tariff. Tariff is import duty, import tax, and non-tariff barriers like protective trade policy, import quota is known as non-tariff barriers, thus providing bigger market access. The consumer further benefits from cultural globalization. as they start using the standard products as being consumed in or used in developed countries. The name and brand of products are popularly known in various markets under the waves of socio-economic globalization. This has created homogeneity in taste and liking of the end users for a product in specific market. With the help of this globalization process and integration of market, each and every country people can use that type of commodity which are using by developed countries. So, the wave of socio-economic globalization increasing or creating homogeneity in taste and liking of end users of a product in specific markets. Next is drivers of globalization for an industry. You know that an industry becomes global because of the occurrence of certain factors. From that standpoint, every industry can't be a global one. There are certain drivers which determine the potential of a globalization of an industry. There are four broad groups of drivers of globalization of an industry. And these four groups are: one is market, second is cost, third is government, and fourth is competition. The removal of trade barriers and growing similarity of national market created the potential for globalization of markets and competition. Globalization generally emphasized on the removal of trade barriers and free flow of goods and services, free flow of investment, free flow of labor, free flow of culture, and free flow of all things in all over the world. So the development of MNCs or of global networks, allowing independent firms, cheap technology, and effective transportation and communication services has provided the practical means necessary for the integration of supply chain. These conditions are necessary but not sufficient. Intense competition in most industries is the driving force necessary for integration and globalization. So the removal of trade barriers are very necessary for increasing the global market and competition. Next is the following four factors which can affect a company's ability to formulate and implement global strategy. And these four things are: organizing structure, management process, people comprise, and cultural comprises. First is, these are the four factors which affects a company's ability to formulate and implement global strategy. One is organization structure. It comprises the reporting relationship in a business and boxes the lines. Management process comprises the activities such as planning and budgeting that make the business run. People comprise the human resources of the worldwide business and include both managers and all other employees. Culture comprises the values and unwritten rules that guide behavior in a corporation. The potential for global strategy include four factors, and these four factors are market factor, economic factor, environmental factor, and competitive factor. Market factor include that the homogeneous market needs the global customer or consumers, transferable brand and promotional strategies, and internationalization of the distribution channel. These factors affect the competitiveness of the industry. Economic factors include the global economies of scale, which can be possible by expanding our business activities. Worldwide sourcing efficiencies and significant difference in countries' cost. Environmental factor like declining transportation cost, improved logistic work, fast telecommunication facilities, and other technological development, including facilitating government policies, are the external driver of the industry. And competitive factors are like competitive interdependence among countries, global moves of competitors, and the prevailing opportunities to preempt and the global moves of the competitors work as an aid for developing a global strategy. So these are the four factors which affects the global, which make the potential for global strategy. These are market factor, economic factor, environmental factor, and competitive factor. Now, strategic implications of globalization is as pattern of international competition, it shifts towards globalization. There are many implications of strategy formulation. In a global industry, functions of finance, marketing, human resource planning, and manufacturing process become more complex. Further, the changing government policies from time to time for the of the host countries have its implication for a global company or a firm. The strategic implications arising out of globalization and described as under. One is international alliances. International alliances are inherent implications of the globalization. As a firm becomes global, it has to enter into alliances with similar kinds of firms for the purpose of manufacturing, sourcing, and marketing, and even for supply chain and logistic operation to cut the cost of business. Second is organizational challenge, the need to configure and coordinate globally in complex ways creates some obvious organizational challenges such as organizational structure, reporting hierarchies, communication linkages, and reward mechanism. Third is relation with government in a globalized era. The selection of foreign markets to enter and the mode of entry will, by and large, depends on the negotiation with the foreign governments. If you have a strong and good relation with the government, then you can take advantages from globalization. Otherwise, you can't get more advantages. Fourth is competition. A global firm may be a better position to complete its global rivals as it can augment its resources globally. Now, we can conclude from the today's session that in today's session we have discussed about globalization and its evolving paradigm. To sum up, the pillars of globalization are open trade or free trade and vital civil and legal institutions that uphold individual and group rights while facilitating social and economic integration. The benefits of international trade are numerous, like it will increase job opportunities, job creation, improving customer welfare, stimulating economic growth, and so on. Nevertheless, limiting globalization only to trade and profits associated with increasing trade volumes does not do justice to growing beliefs and practices that aims at establishing a prosperous and stable world. In other words, globalization can't just be synonym to trade volume and export profit because globalization is a very broader concept and a continuous process in which all world is interconnected with not only for goods and services trade. We can trade like labor can be traded easily uh, in rest of the world market. Investment can be easily flow and all things can be easily flow to the abroad. Thank you.